At the end of the podcast, the interviewer asked him one question. Hey, are there any phrases or sayings that you like to live your life by? And he said, well, there's two. The first is, this too shall pass. What a comment. This too shall pass. It's just a saying. It's a saying that when things are really good, be humble. And particularly when things are really bad, have faith. This too will pass. His second statement was really important that morning. He said 2 Corinthians 4:17. Romans 8, verse 28. Romans 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things God's work for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. I'm going to say that again. As we know that in all things God works for the good of those who loved him, who have been called according to his purpose.
Welcome to the Think and Reform podcast. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Luke Saint. This is a Christian podcast where we talk about Christian political science, Christian culture, and we promote the law of God as the only recognizable, or the only law that should be recognized by the magistrate at the expense to man's law. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please head over to futureofchristendom.org for more information on this podcast, on other podcasts, and be sure to sign up for our Lancastrian Theonomy Symposium this coming March. We already have a bunch of people signed up here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Hope to see everyone there. Head over to futureofchristendom.org, and where we're also getting ready to announce and plan for next year's Future of Christendom Conference as well. So what you just heard there was a man who's clearly qualified to make policy, right? So on the last podcast I did on this subject, looking at a podcast done by Conversations That Matter with James Baird, James told everyone he's not qualified to make policy because he's a pastor. And so what you just heard was Glenn Youngkin, who apparently is qualified to make policy, bumble his way through a Bible verse that basically you learn when you're in diapers if you're a real Christian. So my guy gets up there, he starts reading the wrong reference, then he starts to read Romans 8:28 that most Christians in conversation can just rattle off. That's like right up there with John 3:16. And it's not a difficult verse. And I'm not sure if he's ever thought about the verse his entire life because he bumbled it. First he got the reference wrong. Then he misquoted it because he didn't read it right. And then he, second time, went back and he read it again and he misquoted it a third time. He still didn't get it right. You can say, oh, he was nervous or whatever. Yeah, it's certainly possible. But this is like saying like, and his favorite Bible verse was John 3:16. For the love of okay, let me start over. You know, it's like, if you were a real Christian, you would kind of like know the Bible verse. We all kind of know this one. For we know that all things work together for the good of those who are loved by God, or which depending on what version you use, you can just rattle it off. We all know this one; it's easy. For the good of those who love Him, and this guy who's apparently can't get it, make his way through a Bible verse is equipped to make policy that forces other people to do it at gunpoint. Hey, whatever. Hey, what am I? I'm just a podcaster, right? I guess I'm not qualified for the for the pastor. I'm not qualified to make policy. Hey, what do I know, right? So I just let the people who the wiser, older, godlier men. Everyone who came before me, they aced everything, and they told us that. What's more, they said, yeah, we aced it. It says it's don't listen to you who are in the 21st century. Don't listen to anyone. Listen to us. We got it right. That's what they said, right? And they never fought with each other back then. They're all in Valhalla right now and drinking beer and reliving fighting stories, so that the people of today can just feel how disappointed they all are in us that we didn't listen and do everything that they say, because they aced everything, got it right, and could never be wrong about anything that they say. And if you think I am being facetious, I actually am not. Several times when I have been in discussions, I've brought the scriptures to bear on the conversation at hand. And several times I was responded with, well, I'm just going to concede the argument to the dead people, and couldn't get people to interact biblically. So that's happened several times by Christian nationalists. They won't interact biblically. Some of my friends will. They actually will appeal to the scriptures, though. I think those days are fading fast, and we're just kind of going to go with whatever. Our fathers, they got it right. To jail with you, you Baptist. Anyway, so let's go back to the King of Kings, Reform Guide to Christian Government, Conversations That Matter. Let's continue talking about this podcast. And this is James Baird and his book, King of Kings, Reform Guide to Christian Government. It's a podcast about his book.
Rulers who are constantly breaking his law or are foolishly shirking his authority, we can't expect to prosper. He may be patient with us, but we should not expect it. And that applies today as much as any time.
And I think it does apply today. It's
yeah.
People wonder why it feels like America is being judged so often. I mean, that's been my whole life. I think I've heard Christian leaders say that we're on the precipice of or being judged.
Yep.
And the solution is we need to repent. We need to turn back to God. Yep. I don't know if this reaction to Charlie Kirk's death will be that. I mean, there's hope there that maybe there's some renewed interest in Christianity. But what do you see as a pastor, the next steps being? I mean, do you see positive direction? Do you think that civil magistrates can encourage this positive movement that we may have developing in front of us right now?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at what J.D. Vance did on the Charlie Kirk show, leading people in the Lord's Prayer, reciting the Nicene Creed. You saw what him and Rubio and Hegseth did at the memorial. I mean, just open with their Christian faith. And whether we like it or not, we tend to follow the examples of our rulers, either positively or in reaction to it. But one way or another, what our leaders do.
I don't understand the J.D. Vance ignorance. And I call it ignorance because a lot of people, a lot of Protestants really like him. And he's Catholic. And I don't understand how naive people can be. I don't understand it. He's Catholic. And if he ever got the reins of power, he would institute Catholicism and throw everybody else in prison. If he was, I mean, absolutely, the Vatican would be putting so much pressure on him. He wouldn't be like, "Oh, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm just going to do, they elected me because they trusted me." That's not going to happen. If he ever got the reins of power, I'm talking about now as a Christian prince. Obviously, the Constitution would hold him back a little bit. But if people look at him as a Christian prince already, like, oh, the Christian nationalists are getting excited about J.D. Vance. You mean the Catholic? You want a Catholic as the Christian prince of a Protestant nation? And I just have to wonder. These people they're so obsessed with our fathers. Our fathers. Those who came before us, older, wiser, godlier men, who fought bloody battles against the children of the Antichrist that they called the Catholics. And I don't understand how a movement that's in love with tradition, the Protestant tradition, ostensibly, that's what they say anyway, how can a movement that's in love with the Protestant tradition even bring J.D. Vance into the conversation? if you are confessional, he serves the Antichrist. He is the child of the Antichrist. That's what the confession says, right? 1646, Westminster Confession. The Pope is the Antichrist. He's serving the Antichrist, and you want him to be the Christian prince of your formalist nation. I just don't. I wonder, how naive you could be to even play and toy with that idea, and they play and toy with that idea on this. I mean, not as bad as I've seen some people, but they'll say something like, "Oh, he's the most Protestant Catholic." Oh, come on, guys, how stupid could you be? If you guys really love our fathers, and you're all about like, oh, you can't slander our fathers, you're slandering our fathers, by playing, Skillet is slandering our fathers by turning O Como Come Emmanuel into a rock song. And I think I can't prove it, but I think that's an argument that's being floated around now. Something like that. And the Christian nationalists are just nickel and dime, and everyone, you go, fathers, those who came before us, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yes, have you read what they said? They hated the Catholics. They fought bloody wars against the Catholics. Many of them were killed by the Catholics. And now you, their children, are talking about, let's make a Catholic the leader of a Protestant nation. Guys, what are you doing? That's why I have to laugh at the Christian nationalist movement. It's all nationalist, no Christian.
Does impact us. And for lots of people, millions of people, especially young people across the U.S., this has now caused them to ask questions they wouldn't be asking otherwise. And I think that's awesome. We see two things. We see revival, and we see an opportunity for conversions. And the revival is happening by calling people to be courageous, right? Mm-hmm. To stand up when they wouldn't have otherwise. Revival looks different now than it would have in the past. But then you also have people who are going to church for the first time, and that's huge. And a lot of that has to do with how the administration has treated Charlie's assassination. They took advantage of it for good things.
Yeah. And two of those people that you mentioned, Rubio, I think,
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong here, and Vance, are Roman
Mm-hmm.
Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the questions that I see it comes up so often. And obviously you're Protestant, but there is a certain quarter of the online, especially Christian Reform community, that gets nervous about these things and starts trying to talk about the differences between Protestantism and Catholicism. If it's a Mormon, it'll be the same
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. Maybe Glenn Beck says something that's actually really good.
Mm-hmm.
He believes in the 10 Commandments, but
Mm-hmm.
this is something that we just need to be cautious. Like, those people aren't, born again believers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have the same outlook you do, that it's great that J.D. Vance talks about the Lord's
Mm-hmm.
Prayer. Like, this, I don't see any world that's a bad thing, but there are Christians out there who do think that if it's going to be a Christian nation,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote, or if we're going to be a Christian country, we have to have people that are actually born again
Mm-hmm.
in these positions of power. Otherwise, it's false religion. Otherwise, it's idolatry. Roman Catholic Church is idolatry. Otherwise, we're going to be deceived in various ways. What do you have to say to people who would critique in that way?
A few points. The first one would be, this is where politics is different than the church. So when it comes to politics, the thing that you care about most is not, did they really mean it? When it comes to politics, the first thing you care about most is, did they really do it? Politics is all about your external action. It's the world that is on the outside. The church is where you want to come in and examine someone's soul, right? So we get some category confusion sometimes when we don't see that distinction. You could imagine someone who says, I don't want that godly law to get passed because it could lead to hypocrisy, people following God's law when they don't really mean it. Well, that's a great thing for you to ask them when you're sharing the gospel, or if they're a fellow Christian when they're at church. When it comes to politics, the question is, was that a good law? Is it encouraging them to do the right thing? So in this case, it's true that you want them to believe it with their heart.
And the question here is, when have the Catholics had any history at all of instituting good laws, of instituting God's law? We know that they don't do God's law. They barely even know it. So why would we expect light from darkness? Why would we expect something from nothing? The Catholics have no good history of instituting good laws systematically throughout their political systems. They don't do that. They don't institute good laws. They're horrible at that. In fact, they're really bad at that. You know, an argument is made in history that the modern era came about when the Dutch threw off the Catholic political system, because then that basically started. Segued the old world into the new world, because then we started getting rich, and then, you know, kind of like the modern lifestyle was a result of that. And ultimately, some people say that the Industrial Revolution was a result of the Dutch throwing off the Catholic presence in the Netherlands. And why would anyone expect a Catholic leader to institute good laws? Now, I think they're thinking about Franco. I guess he was a Catholic or something like that. And maybe they're thinking about who's the Bukele down there in what is it, man? What is it? Does it sound San Salvador? I forget what that country down there, Central America. El Salvador, I think, is where he is. And I guess these guys are Catholics, and I think they're thinking like, oh yeah, J.D. Vance would do something like that. They didn't institute good laws. They instituted statism. And what they're doing is they're creating a huge problem down the road at the expense of a little piece right now, right? Let's get a little piece right now, or they're getting a little piece right now at the expense of massive problems down the road. We're screwing the next generation. We're giving them work that they're going to have a much more time cleaning up than us. We're stealing their resources now, and we're taking all the capital of the future and we're putting it in the present. We're paying for the present with the capital of the future. That's what's going on there in El Salvador with Bukele. They're going to have serious problems down the road, just for a little bit of peace. And you know, these things work for a little bit, you know, but then major problems start coming, you know, coming down the pike, and then you've created a bigger problem than what you had before, you know. So I don't understand how someone could say that J.D. Vance would be a good political leader from a Christian perspective. I'm sure he'd be a savvy political leader. I'm sure that he'd be a knowledgeable political leader. But we judge people through the law. That's what James 4 says, right? So live and act as though you're being judged by the law of liberty. And that's how we judge other people. We use the law to judge them. We use God's law, God's word, to judge their actions. Are you being just or are you being unjust right now? And the only standard that we have that doesn't change is the law of God. The Catholics have been historically horrible with the law of God. It's just been bad, really bad, just terrible with instituting the law of God. You know, we threw off the Catholic Church, and then we created America. The Protestants, you know, who are like, you know, not united, and you know, we all these different factions, and then we created the greatest country, you know, in the world at the time, United States of America, right? And that would be the Methodists, the Congregationalists, the Presbyterians, even the Baptists, dare I say, who came together, and the Catholics a little bit, came together to create the greatest Protestant nation, and probably the greatest nation that ever existed outside of Old Testament Israel, from a political standpoint. So I'm just wondering why you would think that a Catholic would be a good leader of a Protestant nation. It makes no sense to me.
But you also want them to do it with their hands. It's the inverse of the principle that Jesus teaches us in the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, if you hated someone with your heart, you've murdered them. Well, the point of that is not that hating someone is as bad as killing them, right? It is It is worse to kill someone with your heart and hands than to just kill them with your heart by hating them. Well, if you flip that, it's the same idea here, where you want them to act like a Christian and you pray that they will really mean it. But you, at the bare minimum, want to make sure that they're doing it. And you also have to look at your options. You know, what's the next best alternative to what we currently have? And in that sense, I would say we don't deserve J.D. Vance. As a nation, you look at the way we've rebelled against God, how we've been lazy and
I don't get people. You love your fathers. You want to read the Reformed tradition. They hated the Catholics. They hated them. And if we're going to say a Reformed guide to Christian government here, a Reformed guide, if you read the Reformers, they hated the Catholics. They fought wars against them. Have you ever heard of the 30 Years' War? One of the worst wars in all of history. And how can we say I'm for the Reformed view of government, but also we don't deserve a Catholic leader in the same podcast? That makes no sense to me. What's the point of being Reformed if a Catholic can do it just as good as anybody else? What in the world is the point? A Reformed guide to Christian government. By the way, J.D. Vance would be a great leader of this nation. What's the point of being Reformed? I don't get it. I don't even understand the point anymore. If he's not even Reformed and he gets it, we don't deserve him. Then what are we doing here, man?
seeking. We should be thankful that we have a man who is leading people in the Lord's Prayer and reciting the Nicene Creed. And then we ask for more on top of that. The second thing that I want to say is, well, first, it's about outward action. That's what matters most. Second, I would say that J.D. Vance is probably, I need to turn this setting off my computer.
Wait, what is that? I'd never seen that before.
I think I got some other ones too.
Wait, what if I do it? No, it doesn't do it for me.
No, it's just my computer. Does this one want to do it? It's like,
okay.
It does weird stuff. Anyway, what was I saying?
That was great. Yeah, the computer was agreeing with you, what you were saying there. Your second point about Vance.
He's the most Protestant Catholic I've ever seen.
It's just, I think that's not, with respect to James and with respect to John. I mean, John's just kind of like laughing at it, but with respect to James, Pastor James, I think that's very naive. I think that's very naive. Yes, he's very Protestant, right? But that kind of it indicates to me that you don't understand politics. A politician will be whatever you want him to be at the moment. If he's a Catholic in a Protestant nation, my guy's going to act Protestant. If he's trying to get the attention of a largely Protestant people, he's going to act Protestant, not because he's a Catholic, but because he's a politician. Don't remove his political stature or his political nature from the equation. You know what I'm saying? Look how Trump looked before he got elected. And he's just been awful. He's been terrible. To everyone's surprise, apparently. Oh, I didn't know he was going to be so bad. Didn't see this one coming. And there are a lot of people who were standing by the sidelines saying, "Yeah, I'm not going to give up my principles to vote for Trump because I do know what time it is, and I'm not going to give up my principles." They're going, "Yeah, saw this one coming a mile away, guys." And everyone else who was like, "Hey, you know what time it is?" and it's time to vote for Trump. And the same one's going, "Oh, I didn't see this coming. It's so weird. He's acting so strange." No, he's acting exactly the way that people who had any sort of principle and dedication to God and Christ and his word saw he was going to act. If you read the book of Proverbs, you shouldn't be surprised by the way Trump is acting. Did you really think that somebody who hates Christ and his word was going to magically bring about success and prosperity? Did you think that? These people are just, we're so naive. Yes, J.D. Vance looks and acts like a Protestant because J.D. Vance is a politician. He'll do whatever you want to get that position. That's what Trump did.
It seems like everyone during Kirk's funeral was a Protestant, even though so many of them were not. They all spoke like it. I don't know. It was an interesting moment in that.
Not a good, not a good summary of our political leaders. It seemed like everyone was acting like a Protestant, but I know that they're not. Just a really bad political class, if we're saying that. About our Christian gatherings.
Sense.
It was very weird.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah, in a good way, you know.
No, it's not weird, guys. It's to be expected. They'll do whatever you want them to do. You want to be a Catholic, they'll be a Catholic. You want to be Protestant, they'll be a Protestant. You want them to be a Hindu celebrating Diwali. The beginning of this podcast of Conversations That Matter was us bemoaning the fact that Trump was celebrating Diwali. He'll be whatever you want. These guys, they're not Christians. I'm not talking about the guys on this podcast. I'm talking about our political leaders. They're not Christians. All right? Even Charlie Kirk is suspect. I hope you know that. We don't know these people. We don't know what they're like behind closed doors. Politicians will be whatever you want them to be. And I think it's just as foolish to conclude that these people, the people who were at the Charlie Kirk rally, were Christians. It's just as foolish to conclude they're Christians as it is to conclude that Trump is a Hindu because he celebrated Diwali.
But yeah. I would kind of just share the concern that I think other evangelicals would have if Vance got up there and started praying the rosary in front of everyone, or praying to Mary, or praying like a Catholic. I'd say that's bad news. That's not going to be good. But he sounds like a Protestant. He's acting like a Protestant.
It's bad news that he's a Catholic already, and we're toying with the idea of him being the leader of a Protestant nation. And he prays the rosary behind closed doors, right, Pastor James? You know that he prays to Mary behind closed doors, right? He does that, and he encourages other people to do that as well. That's what Catholics do. Just because he didn't do it at the Protestant rally should not give anyone any hope. If you really love your fathers and you don't want to slander them, don't toy with the idea of a Catholic, people that they hated and fought against and who tortured them and persecuted them, should be the leader of a Protestant nation. All of their hard work down the drain, just because, I don't know, he's the most Protestant Catholic I've ever seen.
In many ways, American Catholics have become more Protestant than they realized.
Yeah.
And that's what matters most.
There is
politics.
Yeah, what was that book? I referenced it not too long ago. Who Are We? 2003 it was written. Who's the author? It's going to come to me in a minute. But the author of that book, he makes the case that Roman Catholics essentially have adopted Protestant ways, especially in the public sphere.
That's right.
Which I think is interesting.
I think Tom Holland makes a similar point where he's like, even new atheists are fundamentally Protestant.
Yeah, like Richard Dawkins.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, they get kind of these test cases seem to bring it out where they're against this evil God they see in the Old Testament, and then someone wants to create like Islam as the establishment in their country, like Richard Dawkins, and he's like, "Wait a minute, I'm Christian."
Right?
How?
Right. We should just tell you that they're hypocrites. Right. First off, they're hypocrites, and secondly, they're horrible choices to be political leaders. Just because the atheists think and act like Christians, that's good. Doesn't mean we should be putting them in charge of other people's lives. And it's the same with the Catholics. Just because they look and sound like a Protestant doesn't mean that, here's the reins. Go ahead, start making policy. These are terrible, awful ideas, and the Bible gives us requirements of the kind of people we should be electing in Deuteronomy 16, Deuteronomy chapter 1. And Exodus 18. We have, and is it 2 Samuel? Was it David's deathbed? I forget. 2 Samuel 24. I forget the chapter. We have these standards that for some reason we just don't go to the Bible when it comes time to vote. We're like, let's just go to, let's just everyone, you know what time it is. Abandon your principles, vote party.
Are you Christian?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So that's a good answer, I think. And what do you have? I'm curious. I know you have a fairly large church. Do you have magistrates in your church that attend that they seek your counsel as a pastor when it comes to policy or those things? Like, how do you navigate that with your role as a pastor? Is it just giving them the ethical principles?
It's really tough. I think from the pulpit, what you need to do is give a straightforward declaration of what the Bible says about their duty. But then you'll also have them come to you for counsel on particular questions. And although I don't think pastors should be basically outlining the bill they want to be passed for the county from the pulpit, it's still good to advise.
Nobody should be dictating any sort of bill, just for the record.
On particular issues. And man, it is always tough. It is really hard. Politics is, brutal, really tough.
Yeah, because I was at a conference recently. This question came up about the spirituality of the church, which I know is big in the Presbyterian. Are you PCA, by the way?
Yeah, PCA.
You are. So PCA, I know that in those circles and the OPC, that it's like a big doctrine that's appealed to. And I think I agree with it. I want to create lines. And so the way I answered it was to say, look, the pastor should be preaching about ethical matters that do translate into political policy.
That's right.
The pastor should also be giving moral direction when it comes to elections. And that may even be saying this candidate is not an option. This one is an option. What I don't like and what I think violates the spirituality of the church is when the electioneering happens in the church. And this is the best I've been able to try to draw the line. Maybe you have a better way, whereby Sunday morning service becomes a rally for a political candidate or a political cause. And you lose the sense of we're actually here to orient ourselves to the transcendent realm and to a holy God that's timeless. You become more immersed in the specific context of a political season, and it's a distraction from the things that set the church apart. So, do you have a way of maybe you like the way I said it? Is there another way to?
I like the way you said it. I like the way you said it. I think that there's a theoretical answer that helps provide a framework, and it's when you understand what the job of politics is. So, politics don't decide the moral law. God does. Right? It's the 10 Commandments. Politics is all about the smartest way to help people follow it in your current situation. So, best example, 6th commandment is don't kill anybody. What does that mean?
I wonder where we're going here.
Well, it means you shouldn't be going too fast on the road because you might
There it is. I'm just, one of these days I'm going to do a supercut of Christians saying speeding is a sin. I'm just going to do like a supercut of speeding is a sin, speeding is a sin, speeding is a sin. I think even our next clip it features speeding is a sin. This is it's like you're dealing with you're dealing with statism when you're talking about speeding is a sin. See, what doesn't make sense to me in this discussion is only God makes the moral law. Okay, got it. God makes the moral law, right? No one else is allowed to make the moral law. Okay, then it can't be a sin for me to be speeding, right? That can't be a sin, right? Because the state can't make a moral law, right? Only God makes the moral law. What's wrong is wrong. We know everything that's wrong. We know everything that's right from the scriptures, right? The state cannot come along and say, okay, now speeding is immoral. That can't be because you're adding to the moral law. This is a new rule. The moral law never says anywhere that being dangerous is a sin. Never says that, right? Now we have to say that the NASCAR drivers are in sin, right? Because they're being dangerous and they're going really fast. They're putting their life at risk. And let's face it, they're putting other people's lives at risk. We have to conclude that they're sinning now. We have to. We have to tell them if your son wants to be a NASCAR driver, you got to tell him, sorry, you can't, because the state has made a new law saying that speeding is sinning. So it doesn't make any sense when someone's like, oh, no, God, the state doesn't make the moral law. Then only God makes a moral law. Then breaking man-made law can't be wrong. Because they're going to say that's immoral. And I'm going to say how or why. Only God makes the moral rules, right? So if God's making the moral rules for me to break man's law, it's not immoral. The Bible never says follow every single one of man-made laws. We know Christ didn't do it. He didn't follow the laws of the Pharisees. He did not. He intentionally broke them. Paul broke a lot of Roman law. He broke a lot of Jewish law. Never broke God's law except for when he was a pagan that I know of. Except for when he was a tried and true Jew. Or at least an outward Jew. Right? Circumcision of the flesh, as he makes there a case there in Romans. But how can we say, oh yes, only God makes the moral law, and by the way, it's a sin to break man-made law? How can we say that? Only God makes the moral law. So what you're doing, if you're speeding, it might be, I don't know, might be foolish. I don't know. Is foolish immoral? Is that synonymous? That's a good question. But that's probably the best you can do. It's foolish because you might get caught and you might have to pay a lot of money. That's kind of bogus. But we can't say that it's wrong because only God makes the moral law, right?
Accidentally kill someone. Well, then you have to make a particular decision. Should the speed limit be 35 or 36 miles per hour? That is the job of a government official, right? Or maybe it should be 45 or 55 or 25. The pastor cannot make those determinations.
We gotta we gotta realize here, it's not like the person who makes the law goes out there with like his own crew and like looks at the road and like wears a hard hat and then does a photo op, and rolls out blueprints and is pointing at the road and the contractors are like nodding. That's not what happens here. All right, it's arbitrary. Sometimes it's foolish. Sometimes it's dumb. The cars of today are much more equipped to go faster than they were when these 55 and 45 speed limits were put in. Right? A lot of times it's arbitrary. Sometimes they institute dangerous speed limits because you should really be going faster or you should really be going slower. But it's so hard to change because of the political red tape. So no, it's not this magical process where like the magistrate is like, I have determined this is a safe speed. No, it's not. It's like, what do you think it is? I don't know that. Oh, okay, we'll just go with that. It's silly nonsense, arbitrary inclinations of half the time people who aren't even elected.
That is the job of the civil government to make that judgment call. But the pastor can say, listen, you got to protect life. That's the sixth commandment. You guys need to be going slower, and I want to call on our government officials to do.
Okay, so there's a little bit of a 1-2 switcheroo there. You got to protect life. It's the sixth commandment. Okay, it's kind of a switch there. The sixth commandment is you shall not murder. That doesn't mean the magistrate has to protect life. Okay? The seventh commandment is you shall not commit adultery. That doesn't mean the magistrate has to protect my marriage. Okay, that's my responsibility, right? The fifth commandment is honor your father and mother. It's not the responsibility of the magistrate to make sure that I do that, right? So there's a lot of gaps in the reasoning that when we examine them, we realize there's nothing holding up the structure, and that was one of them that you just saw right there. Let me play it again here.
Nations. That is the job of the civil government to make that judgment call. But the pastor can say, listen, you got to protect life. That's the sixth commandment. You guys need to be going slower, and I want to call on our government officials to do something to stop this epidemic of needless road killings because people are going too fast.
Right.
Okay, so maybe he wasn't talking about you got to protect life to the magistrate there. He was talking about to his congregation, you need to protect life. And in that sense, okay, I understand. Maybe I take back what I said there. If he's saying yes to the congregation, yes, every individual has a responsibility to protect life. But that doesn't mean that when there's a school day and there's like in-service day and there's no kids walking around and you do 50 miles an hour through a blinking 15, mile an hour school zone, that you're in sin, right? I think people just, they talk about, God's law comes to the spirit of the law, but man's law, they always go back to the letter. And this is what the speed limit thing here is going on. If I say, if I do 50 through a blinking 15 mile an hour, is that immoral? And most people are going to be like, yes. And I'm going to say, wait a sec, but there are no kids walking around. There's nobody around. Is it still immoral? And I think half people are going to be like, well, no, it's not immoral. And the other people are going to be like, yeah, it's still immoral. Because when it comes to God's law, it's the spirit, it's, like Captain Barbosa, more like guidelines and actual rules. And then when it comes to man law, it's like, you better pay every cent of your taxes and you better follow the speed limit or else you're in sin. And we get so caught up into the legalism. We think God's word is legalistic, and then we institute man's law and we become legalists ourselves. It's so pathetic. We become stooges for the state. We become ambassadors of man's law. You're not sinning if you go watch a rated R movie about sex. No, you're not sinning there. But you are sinning if you do 40 through a 25. If you run a stop sign. I cannot tell you how many stop signs I have run. Not many, really. But there have been a lot of stop signs where I come and I'm like, this is a dumb stop sign. It's using something called judgment. And I look left because that's the only turn. It's a left turn. And I look left, there's nobody coming, and I just run right through the stop sign. You know why? Because I have a brain. And the Lord's not going to be up there like tallying the times that I ran the stop sign because I put absolutely nobody at risk because there was nobody else at that intersection. People got to think for yourselves.
So you preach the moral duty. You can even apply the moral duty to a particular circumstance from the pulpit, but you cannot venture into the judgment call that's left up to the civil officials. That's the difference between the spirituality of the church.
Ooh, I wonder where he would get that from. The judgment call. You cannot venture into the judgment call of the civil magistrate. And if his idea of a judgment call is determining the speed limit, again, Exhibit A, Glenn Youngkin, who can barely bumble through a Bible verse. He's more qualified to talk about justice than somebody who's trained and educated on the scriptures. Really, this guy, Glenn Youngkin, can't even quote a Bible verse. He's like, oh yeah, he's got like the magical, oh, I know how to set a speed limit, but you don't. What are we doing here, man? This is so pathetic.
So I'm curious. I know some churches have done this where they will put like a stipulation in their church doctrine. Usually it's abortion. I think there's probably other topics that have been inserted, but they'll say like part of our statement of faith is we believe abortion should only be ended through immediate abolition, not gradualism or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I know pastors that I like, and I'm friends with that have done this kind of thing. What do you have an opinion on that? Because it is endorsing a political strategy. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where you land on that whole debate, but I'll be honest for myself. I was just going to say, like, I get nervous. I tend to get nervous because I've seen on the left what happens when you start going down this path. But what do you say?
Yeah, I agree that I think if we could find a way to immediately end abortion, if I could snap my fingers and end it tomorrow, I absolutely would. But when you start, you got to be careful. You got to be careful about binding the conscience of your civil rulers. So the reason is, should they be doing everything they can to end abortion immediately? Absolutely. But you got to understand there are so many things that they are weighing that pastors usually aren't even aware of, the different trade-offs that are happening. And you got to give them space to make the right political judgment call in that case. So yeah, I would be very concerned about being too detailed like that.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I want to just let people know they can get the book. So King of Kings is the name.
Yeah. And if you watch the debate, my dad, between Wilson and Sumter and Durbin and Pierce, one of the things that Doug Wilson brought up was, well, you can't outlaw abortion in one state, because then you have to stop everyone from leaving that state, and you have to do all these things. It's just too much. You can't do it. You can't do it one state at a time. But I thought that was incrementalism. I thought that isn't that what incrementalism looks like, one state at a time. You're starting to sound like an abolitionist by let's do it all at the same time. Which is I think a pitfall of incrementalists is you actually try to do incrementalism through outlawing abortion, and they're like, well, you can't do it one at a time. It's too difficult, as Doug was saying. You can't do it one state at a time. You have to do them all at the same time. It's like you sound kind of like an abolitionist there. But at the end there, we'd love to do it, but we can't because politics, and it's just too hard. It's too difficult, and I keep saying that the abolitionists are the only ones who are failing upwards right now. Not a single bill passed, but they're changing the conversation and they're changing the culture, one failed bill at a time. So that's the end of King of Kings: A Reform Guide to Christian Government, by Pastor James Baird. Did he make a tweet the other day saying that the church is not the institution for cultural change, it's the state? I don't want to butcher it, but I think I read something like that, and I was like, I didn't know it was like that with you there, Pastor James. Anyway, let's move on to I can't put that in the right area there. Okay, let's move on to a video by Bob the Baptist called "A Defense of the Threefold Division of the Law." This is Bob the Baptist heavily defending the confessions. Big time. I mean, can barely get a Bible verse. When it comes to Christ, a lot of Bible verses. When it comes to the law of God, not many. So a lot of quotations of the confessions, and this is where I really feel a lot of Christians are held back by the confessions. The confessions just don't fight the battles of today. They fought the battles of yesterday that we can learn from and that we can apply to our time. But they obviously felt the need to write these things down because the people before them didn't, and they felt that was a shortcoming, that the people before them did not write these things down. So we had better write them down for today so that the future can be blessed by us. But that's them criticizing the people who came before them, who obviously felt like they didn't need to write these things down. And then the reformers came and said, yeah, we got to write them down. Which, if you were to ask many of the Christian nationalists, that's a no-no, because you're not allowed to say or criticize the people who came before you because they're older and wiser than you. And if they didn't write it down, then who do you think you are to write it down and come together with a confession? The people who are older and wiser than us, I can see the debate. I can see the debate to them. Here's what they said. We're going to go with what they said. So that's one of the pitfalls of the of confessionalism and traditionalism when they come together. It's very contradictory. But here's Bob the Baptist.
There you have it.
So, just a brief introduction into some figures whose theology maps onto that of the Westminster's formulation of the threefold division of the law. We come now to John Calvin. Well, I realize it's rather anachronistic to say that Calvin taught against theonomy. But again, our question is, did Calvin teach the threefold division of the law before the Westminster's divines come on the scene? Does he receive Thomas's distinctions between moral, civil, and ceremonial? He says, I would have preferred to pass over this matter in utter silence if I were not aware that here many dangerously go astray. There are some who deny that a commonwealth is duly framed which neglects the political system of Moses and is ruled by the common laws of nations. In other words, those that say that a nation cannot rely on natural law to come up with law specific for that people are going dangerously astray. Let other men consider how
So let me read this slowly here for the people who are listening. This is from Calvinist Institutes. I would have preferred to pass over this matter in utter silence if I were not aware that here many dangerously go astray, for there are some who deny that a commonwealth is duly framed, which neglects the political system of Moses and is ruled by the common laws of nations. Let other men consider how perilous and seditious this notion is. It will be enough for me to have proved it false and foolish. Okay, so This is exactly what we argue for here at Future of Christendom is the political system of Moses. First, with respect to Calvin, I don't agree with him here. I guess I'd have to probably pull up the full quote, and probably for Calvin, I'd probably have to read the whole chapter to get the full context of what he's saying here. But if we just take the quote here that Bob the Baptist put or displayed, you have to kind of when the Bible posits something as good, it's from God. You have to find something in the Bible that criticizes that thing before you can criticize that thing, right? If I am in no way going to criticize what Phineas did to that Israelite, and I think it was a Moabitess, that were, copulating in the tent. Because God said that what he did there was good. So I would never come along and say, oh, no, what he did was bad, right? When God set up the political system there in Deuteronomy 16 and said, set judges, and these judges will judge each case, and justice shall you follow. For me to say that's not good anymore, I need kind of like a Bible verse to say that's not good anymore, right? There's a lot of references in the New Testament about the insufficiency, contextual insufficiency of the sacrificial system, right? It couldn't affect what Christ had affected, right? So if I'm going to criticize the ceremonial law, I'm going to use the Bible as my reasoning for why I criticize it. I'm not going to say, well, it's dumb to sacrifice animals because, animals are cute and they never did anything wrong. That's not a biblical reason for me to criticize the ceremonial system. I'm going to read Hebrews, and I'm going to read Corinthians, and I'm going to reason from there why the sacrificial system is insufficient for today, right? Why? Because they said so. Nowhere in the Bible does anyone say that God's political system is insufficient. That's said nowhere. That's not a criticism given to the law of God. So I would ask Calvin, on what basis does he do this? And this brings me up to my second point. I think a lot of the people who were connected. Remember who is Calvin writing this to? I believe it's the king of France. Oh, no, it's a duke. No, it's a princess. Is it the Dauphin? Yeah, the King of France. Okay. John Calvin originally addressed the first edition of his Institutes in the Christian Religion to King Francis I of France in a prefatory letter, which served as a plea to end the persecution of Protestants in defense of their beliefs. He also had a broader dual audience in mind, the educated European scholars who could read the Latin version, and through later revisions, his own French countrymen and other Protestants who were hungering for a clear understanding of the faith. Thank you, AI overview. So, unfortunately, throughout the history of Europe, the Europeans really loved their monarchs. And I think that colored a lot of their understanding of the scriptures. I really do. This is evident in the Geneva translation of the scriptures and the King James translation of the scriptures, where the Geneva was much more faithful in the translation regarding the magistrate, where the King James kind of softened the blows a little bit, kind of changed a word here and there, because they didn't want King James to be offended, right? They kind of changed a thing here and there regarding the civil magistrate, whereas the Geneva was like, here it is. We don't care. Here's the whole, kit and caboodle. And unfortunately, we have a bad history of doing this. And this is also evident in the 1646 Westminster Confession, where they're like, yes, the king can punish heresy, and he can be basically head of the church. But once you had a people that was kind of far away from the king, and once we found out, okay, you're away from the king, what do you really think? They were like, oh, that's a bad idea. Maybe we shouldn't do that. 1788 Westminster Confession changed all that, right? So I think a lot of the civil magistrate stuff, even from the reformers, a lot of it was colored by their love for their sovereigns. And with respect to Calvin, I think that's what's going on here. They really wanted their monarchs. They wanted their kings. They wanted their royal families. And I think that caused them to criticize the scriptures, which doesn't really have good things to say about that, about the European political systems of the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Middle Ages. So I think that's what's going on here, with respect to Calvin.
Careless and seditious. This notion will be enough for me to have proved it false and foolish. He goes on in section 15 to defend the distinction between ceremonial, civil, and moral laws.
Okay, I don't know why he's reading this super fast. For the Lord, through the hand of Moses, did not give the law to be proclaimed among all nations and to be enforced everywhere. But when he had taken the Jewish nation to safekeeping, defense, and as became a wise lawgiver, he had special concern for it in making its laws. Now, that's, again, Calvin and his institutes. This is not a biblical claim. The Bible never says this, okay? The scriptures never says, oh, yeah, those laws were just for the Jewish people. It was just for them, and, God gave them laws of justice, but it was just for them. When Christ is saying, the weightier matters of the law are justice, mercy, and faithfulness, and in the kingdom, right? The kingdom which includes the Gentiles and the Jews. Whoever's walking around relaxing the least of God's law shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever's walking around and doing it and teaching others to do it will be called great in the kingdom. The kingdom. This kingdom that Christ established, he's reigning over now. In Christ's kingdom, the one we're trying to further, we need to have people walking around saying, yes, the least of these laws are good, I follow them, and so should you. Right? This includes the judicial aspect of the law, which in no way in the scriptures ever expires. Because the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness, right? That didn't expire. And to walk around and say, yes, it was just because God had a special place in his heart for Israel that we execute those who strike their fathers and mothers, that's ridiculous, and that's not biblical.
Irenaeus, Augustine, Calvin, the Articles, Westminster, Second London is stacking up.
Except the scriptures, maybe that one maybe needs to make an appearance. I don't know. Just spitballing here. Maybe all these humans and documents don't stack up very well against 66 books of inspired scripture.
I declare bankruptcy!
I'm not sure what that quote has to do with the point he just made.
Now, I checked in James Renahan's exposition of the Second London, which is a fantastic book which exposits the historical meaning of what I just said, Second London. And he cites Wolibius, is I saying that right? As the ceremonial law had relation to God, so the judicial law to our neighbor. The judicial law binds us in those things that agree with the moral law and were of common right. But what was of private right? It commanded for the Jewish commonwealth, in particular, do no more bind us than the municipal laws of other commonwealths. I love what Renahan says after this. He says, the judicial laws of Old Covenant Israel no more.
Oh, no. 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 Oh, no. He's quoting James Renahan. He just quoted James Renahan. Is that the same guy? Oh, no. It can't be. Okay, wait a second. Let me look here and confirm. Is this a different guy? Let me look this up here. Is this the guy? Oh, man. Oh, Samuel Renahan. Okay, Samuel Renahan. Is he related to James Renahan? Okay, Samuel Renahan has made a confession of where he has committed adultery. That just I just saw that today. Is James Renahan related to Samuel Renahan? I guess I'm not sure. Okay, so all right, just let me clear that up there. Samuel Renahan. Okay, I'm not sure what the relationship is there, if there is one. Okay. Oh, okay, let's let him continue on here.
Bind new covenant believers than civil laws of the United States bind citizens of other countries of their homeland. So again, getting back to our distinction about, well, we have positive laws here when we have a speed limit, but in other nations and in other towns, the speed limit is different. So it's not a sin to go 55, but it is if the speed limit's 35.
There it is again. Yeah, so there it is. We're infected by statism. Yes, we're sinning is speeding, and speeding is sinning. What's that? Service is selling, and selling is service. You know, it's kind of like the Christian's version of that is speeding is sinning, and sinning is speeding. So there it is. You know, the predictable, typical, yeah, you're sinning if you're going over the speed limit. You know, God's law is not for all of time, but the speed limit is. You know, it's just it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Wow. And it's not a sin to drive on the left side of the road, but it is if you're in America.
No, it's not.
And it's wrong. You notice, maybe this is the place from which Calvin's vehemence came from, that it's wrong to expect other nations to obey the positive laws of your land. And that's what Calvin's point is. It would be wrong for us to say that just because God said it with no other caveats, no other theological distinctions in his judicial laws, that therefore all peoples in all times and in all places must obey it in the same way that they do the moral law. No.
See, and again, we don't even follow the moral law. We let the state, you know, as I said earlier in this podcast, the state becomes the arbiter of the moral law. Even though that's God's realm, only God does a moral law. By the way, you're sinning while you're speeding doesn't make sense at all, because if God's the one in charge of the moral law, I can't be sinning if I'm not breaking his moral law. And his moral law, he never says it's a sin to be dangerous. So I cannot be sinning. Let's go to the one I read on basically every podcast here. 1 Timothy 1, 8 through 11. Theme verse almost of this podcast. Now we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully, understanding this, that the law is not laid down for the just, but for the lawless and disobedient. Now, is that for just the Jews? Is the law laid down for just the Jews because God had a special knack for them? Or is it laid down for the unjust and the lawless and the disobedient, for the ungodly and sinners? Okay? Now, that's very general. We could still say, oh, that's just the moral law. But let me ask you, as I keep reading, are we doing moral law or are we doing judicial law? After he says, the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane, for those who strike their fathers and mothers, that's not 10 commandments. Okay? That's not 10 commandments. That's not moral law. That's judicial law. That's not ceremonial law. That's judicial law. Right there. For the sexually immoral, men who practice homosexuality, enslavers, liars, perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine in accordance with the gospel of the glory of the blessed God, with which I have been entrusted. Did I just read to you a list of moral laws? But here's Paul saying the law is good if it's used lawfully. What law? The moral law? It's not the moral law he's talking about here. He's not talking about the ceremonial. That just leaves one category left. It's the judicial law. And what kind of exegesis could you possibly pull out and say, oh, by the way, the judicial law is a bad idea now? By what standard would you say that? I know you ain't using the Bible, because right here it still says, hey, it's pretty freaking great. So what standard are you using to judge the scriptures? Here, I'm going to make a case and heads up to everyone. I'm not going to use any of the confessions. Okay, full disclosure. I'm not going to use any of the church fathers, none of the reformers. I'm just going to read to you the word of God. I'm sorry that's not sexy enough for you. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is only one lawgiver and judge. He was able to save and destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? Where is the one? So we're not meant to judge the law, any part of the law. We're not supposed to. James 1:25. We're not supposed to live our life in judgment of God's law. And to say that, oh yes, the judicial laws are not really a good idea anymore, that's judging the law. And God is so concerned with his law that he gets mad at the pagans when he says to them, who are you to take my precepts and my commandments upon your mouth? You're not even allowed to say, these are so good and holy, I don't even want you to say them. And yet we have Christians today walking around saying, that's not good enough. I need Aquinas, I need Calvin, I need the confessions, because if we just go with the law of God, it's just not good enough. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. The law of liberty and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, right? This is not conducive to judging God's judicial law, right? That's we don't go around judging God's judicial laws. There's no reason. There's no reason. You hear what I'm saying? I'm using the word reason. There's no reason to say that God's judicial laws are not in effect to today. That they're not good enough, that they don't bind the magistrate. Yes, the magistrate is still bound, 100% still bound by God's judicial laws. All right? You can't read 1 Timothy 1, 8 through 11 and walk away saying, I guess I don't have to follow them anymore. I'm a magistrate. I don't have to do them anymore. In the same way the reformers were trying to save the monarchy, a lot of the people of today are trying to save the Constitution. Unfortunately, our view of the Scriptures is colored by it, and we try to jam the law of God into the Constitution, or vice versa. Let's see. Hold on a second. See, there's 3 passages in James. I always get them confused. Okay, it's James 2. So James 1, James 2, and James 4 all speak about the law of God, and I always get them confused. unfortunately. It's James 2:12. So speak and act as though who are to be judged under the law of liberty. Okay. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not murder. If you do not commit adultery but do murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. So speak and act as those who are to be judged under the law of liberty, right? So we speak and act as though we are going to be judged by God's law. The magistrate has to speak and act as if he's going to be judged by God's law. That includes the judicial laws, right? And I think many magistrates are going to be held responsible for the judgments that they gave, the laws that they made, and the penalties that they gave that are just the mercy of the wicked, which Proverbs says is cruel.
Now, where do the Baptists come into this? Oh, I don't know. They retrieved the Westminster? Thief! Can we stop saying that they copied the Westminster? They retrieved the dadgum thing. No, we are in the project of retrieval. We are actually Catholic, universal Christians. We took what they said and we put it in the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith, chapter 19, and we affirmed all throughout that chapter the threefold division of the law, and the Baptists accepted and retrieved this. Theonomy, because it's positive law, doesn't get into our heart. Because the positive law, again, positive natural distinction.
Because positive law doesn't get into the heart. Now, theonomy, I mean, consistent theonomy is just the law of God, right? The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The theonomy is not arguing for anything different than the law of God that David's talking about here. And if David is saying it's rejoicing the heart, it's reviving the soul, making wise the simple, enlightening the eyes, enduring forever, how could someone come along and say, well, just because, theonomy, just because it's positive law doesn't get to the heart? I'm just kind of wondering, what kind of law do you think we're talking about here? It's God's law. The same law that the psalmist says these things about is the same one we're arguing for. And I don't know what kind of person could come along and say, well, you guys in your positive law, it doesn't get to the heart. When clearly right here in Psalm 19, we're getting to the heart here. The word heart is used in regards to God's law, in regard to God's law. So I kind of wonder about what are people thinking when they say these kinds of things.
Natural law is right to do because it's moral, but positive law is right to obey because God said so. That's it. Lord's Supper, baptism, we must obey because God said so, not because there's anything right or wrong about water, bread, or wine, but not doing so would be disobedience. Specifically not because it's natural, but because God posited it to the new covenant people. So what I'm trying to say is that when you take theonomy, which is positive law, and say that all peoples...
It's God's law, really, not just positive law. There's a lot of tort in there too.
In a nation must obey this just simply because God said it. It doesn't motivate or drive a people to obey. It is only a restraining thing. But of course, this does not mean that I don't think that is a reason to obey God's law. When Christians are obeying the moral law of God, they do so for two reasons.
The two greatest commandments are love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these hang all the law and the prophets. Most of the law is negative. Don't do this and don't do that. Most of it is negative. There's some positive commandments in there, but most of it is negative. Don't do this and don't do that. So I'm not really sure what he's arguing for here when he's like it's just positive law isn't good enough because there's no motivation other than to just do it. But if that's how you view God's law, right? He was just, it was just given to them and they just had to do it. The claim in Deuteronomy 4 that this will be your wisdom. This will make you wise, right? Following God's law is a wisdom producing action in your life. It produces wisdom, right, in your life. God's law does, right, in the sight of the nations. This is a wisdom producing machine. So I don't understand when Bob's saying, "Oh, it's just it's positive law and people follow it. God gave it just because you have to follow it, just because." And I'm just wondering, man, are you reading your Bible? I know you are, but are you believing the claims about the law of God that it's a wisdom producing? Yes, the positive law is a wisdom producing entity in your life, right? The Israelites weren't like following God's law, going, I guess I'll do it, and their whole life, here we go again. It was a wisdom-producing entity in their life, and when they threw off God's political system, they got man's law, and then things really started going south. Like man's law, we follow it because we think like, oh, this is a really good idea, right? We're all legalists here in the United States. We follow man's law not because we love it, but because we're restrained by it. I pay my taxes not because I love the state. I don't follow the speed limit because I think what I'm doing is dangerous. I follow the speed limit so I don't get caught and have to pay a bunch of money to a bunch of baby murdering, homosexual loving perverts and God haters. I just like, it's all the criticisms of God's law. I'm like, why don't you say this about man's law?
One, because God said. And then the redemption of Christ and the gospel gives us a second reason that heightens our obligation to obey. And that is because Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. So now we not only obey because God said, but also because Christ has redeemed us from the curse.
Job says, I know that my Redeemer lives. And the idea of a Redeemer is all throughout the Old Testament law. So I wonder where would he get that idea from? I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just trying to think to myself, okay, where did he get that? In the New Testament, we follow the law even more because Christ has redeemed us from it. What passage would I go to make that case? I'm sure there's one that you can use for that, but he doesn't say it right here.
Of God's law as a covenant of works, but it's still completely legitimate to emphasize that Christians must obey because God said so. It just can't be our only reason. And I think that that's one reason why theonomy can at times feel like a sterile copying and pasting of things instead of taking into consideration.
And the only reason you would say this is because you don't know God's law, right? Why would you not want to copy and paste God's law? Why? Why would you not want to do that? Tell me why. Think for yourself. Why would you not want to copy and paste God's law? Explain that one. That's a bad idea. Why? Oh, because we can't do that anymore? Because the nature of man has changed? Because people aren't unholy and profane anymore? We kind of get it all figured out, and Aquinas gave us those 4 categories of law. Why would you not want to? The only reason I can think of is because you don't know it. And you don't love it, and you don't meditate on it day and night. If this is something I'm supposed to be meditating on day and night, why would I not want to copy and paste it to my society? There's only a couple. There's not many laws at all. In fact, it's quite a freedom-giving political system. And I think if a lot of people understood it, just the political aspect of it, I think they'd be like, hey, this is pretty great. Yeah, definitely copy and paste that. Wow, I get to own my own home, and taxation is voluntary, and no one's allowed to curse God in the public square? This sounds pretty great. So I don't understand where you get this idea that it's sterile, copying and pasting. It wasn't sterile for them. If you read Psalm 119, I don't understand how you could come away saying, oh yeah, the law of God's sterile.
People's human hearts. Whereas being aggressively committed to the threefold division of the law is reformed, and Catholic Christian doctrine. We can dive deep into a Calvin or a Samuel Bolton who's going to emphasize the different uses of the moral law and exposing us and restraining evil and guiding the Christian life and showing me what ought I do. I do not do that. Christ has done that for me. I'm really relying on Bolton here. So I break the law. I flee to Christ for pardon and for mercy, who, Bolton says, turns me back to the law for guidance and wisdom and obedience.
It kind of sounded like, that sounded like, what's his name? John Piper on the Ten Commandments. Like kind of like I didn't really think that one through the whole way because, Christ saves me from the law. Yeah, I don't have to follow the law. But what does he do? He turns right back around to the law again. Wait a second. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Let me just look this up and play this. We play this like every other year. Yes. Let's just play this right here.
John,
I wasn't planning on this, but what he just said there kind of reminded me of this little gem that we've been playing on this podcast for a long time. But let's ask Mr. Piper.
are Christians under the Ten Commandments?
No. The Bible says we're not under the law.
Just listen to this. You can tell that he hasn't thought it through, that he kind of rejects a premise that he's forced to circle back around to and acknowledge and accept later.
So I'm loving Romans 7, 4, 5, and 6. The analogy is you were married, and you better stay married, because if you leave this husband and go marry another, you're going to be called an adulteress. But if he dies, then you can go and remarry. And then he draws the analogy out, a little bit complex the way he draws it out, and says, so we've died to the law. You're not married anymore. You can have another husband, namely Christ. He's raised from the dead. So the approach towards ethics is different. You don't ask the question, am I under the law? We're under grace. Law is fulfilled perfectly by Jesus. We're in Jesus, and God is looking, as far as justification goes, final, my being 100% for you is settled. You've trusted my Son. You've been grafted into Him. You are in Christ Jesus. He fulfilled the law perfectly. He covered all your sins. God sees you in and through Him. Therefore, as far as final judgment goes, and God being 100% for you is settled, and nothing's going to change it. Now, shall we sin that grace may abound? And Paul says, dead men don't sin. If you died to the law, how can you still, if you died to sin, how can you still live in it? Meaning, new birth is the writing of the law on the heart, so that we're not under it, it's under us. It's just coming out. It's coming out. So that the way we strive towards being obedient, holy, loving people is not by getting up in the morning, pulling the list out of our pocket here and saying, okay, there's the list, I'm off to do them. No, we get on our knees, we open ourselves to the whole counsel of God in the Bible. We saturate and shape ourselves by everything He's done, is doing, will do. We stake our lives in the gospel, and then instead of serving the law, we serve one another in love. Love is the fruit of faith in Jesus. Faith working through love. And if you ask, what does love look like? 1 John says it keeps the commandments. Which kind of brings us back to, which commandments? And I'm saying, well, the ones that are loving.
The ones that are loving. See, this is a great representation of modern day Christianity. Haven't thought through this. Just haven't thought through it. Wait a second. I mean, you can see that the gears are turning here for Pastor Piper. Like, he's kind of, and I think he's, you just start. Here's the question. I'm just going to start talking, and I think he had an answer in his mind, but I think what you're seeing here is in a sense some honesty that he's actually never thought through it this way and articulated in this way. Now that I'm saying it, it actually doesn't make sense. But that kind of stuff. I think he's made some realizations he never thought about before, or at least articulated out loud. And it kind of sounds silly when you say it out loud. Which commandments do we follow? The loving ones. God gave us commandments. God gave us commandments that aren't loving. You can find this video on YouTube. I mean, our Christians are the 10 Commandments of John Piper. Let's just see what he says. Does he make the connection and say, would God give us commandments that aren't loving? I mean, the summary of the law is not the 10 Commandments. The summary of the law is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. The love is fulfillment of the law. Not the 10 Commandments. It's the law. So the next question is, okay, are there unloving commandments?
So I love God and do as you please is not bad advice if you're bent on holiness.
So he didn't really resolve the very glaring issue that he came up with there regarding, like, which commandments do we follow? Well, the ones that are loving. Pastor Piper, here's a $100 bill. Show me a commandment that's not loving from God. That's not a loving commandment. It's kind of like the argument that was raised again in the abortion debate. When they're like, well, God gave us the laws about divorce because of our stubborn heart. And the question is, can you give me a law that was not given because of our stubborn hearts? The stubbornness of our hearts, right? That's the ostensible reason. He gave you that law because of the stubbornness of your hearts. Can you give me a law that was given because of the goodness of our hearts? Did we not just read in 1 Timothy that the law was made for the unjust person? That's who it's for. God was thinking about unjust people when he made the law. That's what he made it for, right? It's not laid down for the just, but for the ungodly and the profane. That's who it's for. These and other questions, man, we got to be thinking about this kind of stuff. We've just got to be working it out in our minds. And we've got to criticize every single one of man's claims that don't go back to the scriptures regarding the things that the scriptures address. When it comes to God's word coming into conflict with the word of man, we've always got to side with the word of God. And I think a lot of the people that were that I was criticizing in this, a lot of times in this podcast, a lot of times they're just the long and short of it is they're siding with the word of man. The first one, James Baird, was siding with the reformers at expense of the law of God. The second one, Bob the Baptist, was siding with the confessions at expense of the law of God. And strangely enough, John Piper is siding with love, I guess, his version of love at expense of the law of God again. But there's one lawgiver, there's one judge. And we've got to think and act as though we're going to be judged by God's law, not by man's law, and not by love, whatever that is at the time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. I'll wrap it up right here with that great dead-end question that Pastor Piper asked. And we'll end it right there. In the same way his argument ended at a dead end, we will also end this podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the Think and Reform podcast. Head to futureofchristendom.org for more great podcasts, debates, articles. We got books there, and we have information on upcoming conferences. We will see you next time, my friends. And remember, think and reform.